Good evening. I have a short presentation. I tried to focus on the way we have tried to address capacity needs, changing capacity needs within the organization. A little bit about BAIF for those who are not aware. We are basically an organization which is involved in rural development. We are also an applied research organization. We are recognized as a scientific research organization. So we do a lot of rural development work, a lot of extension work. We have been operating since 1967. Over these years, we have been able to pioneer a few approaches which have become mainstreamed over the period. In the 70s, early 70s, we were the first organization to introduce in India farmer-based home-delivered breeding services for livestock. So we introduced frozen cement technology, cryogenic chains, which brought the breeding services to the doorstep of the farmers, even where roads didn't exist. That has become the state of the art in the country. We also were able to put together an approach which was a farming system approach implemented in tribal areas, where the whole program was based on building livelihoods around a combination of different land-based activities: agriculture, horticulture, forestry, along with it water resource development, soil and water conservation. So all that, a holistic program approach which also caught on among the tribals because it made a lot of difference to them, and the synergy it produced probably had a very lasting impact. So that program, which is popularly called as the Wadi program, was also picked up by many organizations in the country, and it has been implemented in very different ecosystems. Apart from that, we have been working on natural resource management, watershed development, ravine land reclamation, work on saline lands, and so on. And there are some very good models that have emerged out of that. While we were working on all these production systems, we have also worked as a natural extension into value chain activities. We have organized farmers. We have a number of farmer producer organizations that exist in our program areas. There are more than I think about 60 farmer producer organizations with a total membership base maybe of 250,000 farmers. And we have also a second tier producer company which brings together all this for some umbrella operations. So that is the whole context of BAIF and BAIF's programs. While talking about extension and advisory services, one thing we have realized, and maybe done it sometimes in a planned manner, sometimes in an unplanned manner, but within the organization, we have realized that extension and advisory services have to keep, they cannot remain the same. There is a continuing development that has to go on, an evolution that has to go on. And based on that, therefore, the capacities required for the extension and advisory services also have to keep, changing. And these changes that happen are triggered by three categories of factors. One of the categories is the changing global perspectives. I will come to each of them. Then there are changing local contexts, and there are changes in the ways development is being done. So I think all these changes are happening as a large, force of change within society, and naturally the extension and advisory services have to keep adapting and internalizing all these changes so that they are relevant in each changing time. So with this type of triggers which we keep facing because we have to produce the results of development on the ground, therefore there is a need to keep adapting and keep changing because of these triggers. Now some examples. Now when we are talking of changed global perspectives, this is just an example. Now as we all know, the understanding about sustainability issues, understanding or facing, realizing, and therefore being able to respond to the effects of climate change. So the climate change adaptation that is required, what we talked about as climate resilient agriculture, all those are emerging needs which have happened over a period of last 1 decade, 2 decades. Now, this has sort of even conceptually in terms of understanding as our combined pool of experience and knowledge and wisdom, I think this maturation process has happened over a decade or a decade plus. Now, if that happens, it is going to influence on what happens at the farmer level. It is going to influence on how this gets changed into tracking of what we are doing. It is going to affect how organizations who are engaged in work of development have to respond and adapt themselves to this change. So as the concepts and understandings of different aspects and the changes that happen at the macro level or the global level come into reality, there has to be a change that is required. Now, farmer level, we are seeing that in the morning Dr. Tripathi was saying how 70% of the queries that come to the call centers are now relating to weather changes. Now, this is awareness that is building up at the farmer level as a response to what he is facing. But we have to, as extension workers, also see that there is a very planned and knowledge-based response that we have to take to the farmers, that this is the way probably you can, if not mitigate, adapt or face the changes that are coming. So naturally, what goes to the farmers as a message, the way it will go, the type of changes that are required to be brought about, this will get influenced by these global changes of better understanding of sustainability issues, better understanding of climate change aspects. Now, this is an example. So there are global level, macro level changes which keep influencing how extension is done, what extension is done, and therefore the changes are also required in the capacity. So the needs of capacity development have to be factoring in the changes that happen at the macro level. The other thing that keeps happening is at individual level, as we all know, maybe 20 years back, 30 years back, 40 years back, the whole emphasis was on production systems, helping individuals to produce more. So the whole direction of effort and the whole setup of extension was originally created to make that happen. But now, individual level production is no longer the only goal. Of course, it is required because finally when you want to have a remunerative agriculture, production has to be there, otherwise there can't be anything remunerative out of it. But there are many other factors which are going to influence at the individual. So, apart from individual level production, an increasingly important issue that is arising all across in all sectors of agriculture, whether we are talking of crops, whether we are talking of horticulture, whether we are talking of livestock, is the sustenance of productivity. And we are seeing not only in crop agriculture but also in other aspects of agriculture a gradual decline of productivity because resources are not properly used, because there is not adequate scientific management of the factors of production in those. So sustaining productivity is a need, not just increasing production. It may have already reached a certain level. Now this requires a different type of messaging and knowledge and practices that have to go to the field level. But at the same time, because now it is not just a question of production, but we have also to engage with the produce that comes out, engage with markets, engage with intermediate, engage with value chain, different steps. We are talking of producers being able to move up the value chain, if not to the end, at least a few steps up, so that there is a better return to the producer. So that requires group actions. It cannot be only at individual level. So again, the extension requirements that get triggered because of this change of context, local context, is of a different nature. So all these things, what it implies is that there are different types of triggers that that decide the change that is required in the extension and advisory systems, and therefore the change that is required in the capacities, and that is the way one can arrive at what is the capacity need at a particular point of time. And this is a continuing thing. This is not something which you do now and then you do after 10 years. There has to be a continuous understanding of what is happening. Okay. The other thing is the terms of engagement of the extensionist with the farmer. And when I say the extension worker, I am not talking of only the government system, not only the public system. Because if you look, there have been a lot of surveys asking farmers what is the source of your knowledge or your information. And the majority of it is input dealers. That is the reality we are facing with. Almost equal proportion is peer groups, or maybe the role models or the opinion leaders or whatever. And then the rest of the possible channels fall much below that. So when this is the situation, we realize very clearly that it is not, the engagement with the farmer is not the preserve of only the public extension system anymore, much less than maybe 30 years back, 40 years back. So there are a lot of other inputs that are coming in. Now there was also in the morning a talk about what managed course for the diploma course for input dealers. Now this is the step probably to bring in the input dealers into the right perspective. But considering that there are going to be a lot of others who are going to engage in the delivery of knowledge and skills to the producer, there is not going to be everything gratis anymore, because there is going to be a cost recovery of those other channels. And so whether we are talking of agriculture inputs being provided, whether we are talking of technology products being disseminated, whether we are talking of technical services being provided like the breeding services in our cattle development center or financial services, cost recovery is going to be an important driver when we are talking of the non-public channels. And therefore there is a movement from gratis to paid. And when this is happening, naturally the way extension and advisory services are going to be delivered will be very different, because the engagement with the farmer when it is a paid service is very different than the engagement with the farmer when it is a gratis service. So I think that change that is coming about in the economy is also an important thing, for which even the public system has to be supportive of that, because ultimately that is a sustainable direction. The public system has to play the role of balancing to see that other agendas don't become the predominant agendas of this effort, because if there is a input provider, then naturally the input provider is going to be driven by an agenda of his business. If there is a large procurement agency, then that procurement agency is going to be more bothered about looking at the farmer as a element of the supply chain for that company. So their way of extension is going to be different. So there has to be the balancing of these influences by the public system, but the role of these other influences, and therefore the role, the change engagement with the farmer is not to be missed. So I have just drawn upon example from what we have experienced in BAIF, and that I have taken, though we have worked in many other sectors, I have taken the livestock sector. Now if you look at the livestock sector, as I said, 40 years back we started with a dairy program of cattle breeding, crossbreeding, which delivered artificial insemination using frozen semen technology at the doorstep of the farmer for the first time in the country. That time farmers did not know that a straw of semen can produce a calf. That time reaching the farmer was very important. That time getting the message in time that the cow is in heat so that it can be inseminated at the right time was very important. That time farmers were not at all vigilant about these things. There was money required to be paid either to the farmer or to the informer to do this in time so that the animal can be bred. That was the situation of extension in those days. So the whole effort was to say that, okay, your cow, the progeny of your cow can be more productive. There is something like crossbreeding. There is a possibility of doing that using this tiny straw. And so the whole requirement of extension was very different in those times. Now today, the situation is totally changed. The farmer is much more aware. You don't have to talk about crossbreeding anymore as a matter of convincing him. The high awareness is to the point of the farmers being able to understand what type of a breeding policy that should be followed for my cattle, being able to understand that, okay, this is the type of additional supplementation of inputs that is required for my cattle, but there is still, that is the limit, only at the level of management. If you look at what is happening in the world today, the whole knowledge scenario is changing drastically. Genotyping, the use of genomics has become a very important part of the science and technology of livestock development in the West. In India, we are far behind. As yet, we have not yet gone into that. But this is not to be missed because we will have to move into it in a very short time. Now, if that is there, the pressure can be created if the farmer becomes aware of what is genomics. If the farmer is able to understand that this is the way it can help me do my activity better. And you don't have to be a geneticist to understand that. He is a shrewd businessman, so he will understand. But we have to take this knowledge, this level of understanding to him. And that is the challenge of today's extension for livestock development. Because the farmer is capable of doing that if he is taken, if all this is taken to him. Similarly about diagnostics. Now there was a time when there was very little that was done about healthcare. Then there was an era of mass vaccination. Now there is an era of more specific vaccination for a larger number of diseases. The awareness has to be there at the farmer level. Only then this will get applied. There is a possibility now of doing diagnostics at the farmer's doorstep by using kits. You can diagnose for diseases. You can diagnose for pregnancy. Not in the conventional way, but you can diagnose in 20 days after breeding whether the animal is pregnant or not by using simple kits. Now this is technology that is developing today. There is technology today of sorted semen where you can produce a calf which is female with 90% assurance. So you have to use sorted semen. This is a technology product which is available. The awareness at the farmer level is still not there. So there is a gap. So we must not only relate our extension efforts to how things have changed within the country, which they have, as far as the farmers' understanding and requirement is concerned, but also what is happening at the global level. Also what is happening in terms of availability of technologies and products. And that also has to get translated if we want to see that our producer becomes, capable of competing with the best in the world. And it is possible. It has happened where farmers have taken their own initiative, they have been able to do it. But if you want to do it at the country level, this is what. So, this example from the livestock sector is how the requirements of changes in extension and advisory services have to draw reference not only from the changes that have come about at the farmer level, but also the changes in knowledge and science development that is taking place at the global level and what is becoming possible or available or imminently available as technology and technology products in the country. And all this, again, there are a lot of commercial overtones to it that is developing, which means the farmers have not to be, supported to produce more milk so that the country is better. He has to be supported to produce more milk so that he becomes a rich farmer. And that is the whole, the whole effort of it. So there are a lot of value chain activities in which they have to get into. There is a whole range of inputs, and all these are commercial services which maybe producer organizations will have to take a role. So when we are looking at advisory, extension advisory services, my point is that it has to draw reference from a very wide range of contexts, not just, something which is happening locally. It has to convert that into the goals of changes, and therefore the capacities of this chap, the central chap, which 40 years back were of one type, today are required to be very, very different, and all these are going to influence that. And that is the way we have to define the capacity needs that are, valid at this point of time, and keep on doing this as a continuing exercise. Thank you.
I hope that is the question. Still, that's okay.
Please, clear. I have only one suggestion. That is in terms of three changes you got. Change in policy and legal reform also may be important. For example, in terms of organic certification, GM crops.
Sure.
That would also is.
I agree. Yes.